Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
So all of these authors that we've heard about are associated with the old quest for the historical Jesus, trying to figure out who this Jesus of history was in light of Enlightenment skepticism. Who is this Jesus of history and how is that connected to the Christ of faith? Most of them threw out the Christ of faith and focused here. Questions that arise from all of this. One, can we write a history or biography of Jesus? What can we really know about the Jesus of history? Again, we're just piecing it together, right? Trying to piece together who the Jesus of history was. Second question, what are the Gospels then? Are the Gospels history? Or are the Gospels theology, faith statements? Or somehow a mixture of both, right? Somehow they're stories, yes, they're faith stories, but ultimately, don't they have to be grounded in that historical person? Another question, what are the sources for the Gospels, right? Where did these Gospel writers get their stories? Did they get them from actual things that happened? From things that they heard? Was it hearsay? The Gospel of John, written much later, where did that come from? That's so different from these other three. Where did that come from? Another question, what is the nature and function of myth in the Gospels? You know, are these stories historical fact, or are there some elements that may not be? How does history and myth relate? Is there any connection? Can you think of great people or stories that just sound overly fantastic, right? Some great stories of people. George Washington never told a lie. I mean, we have these stories. Historical person, but then we later build up stories about those persons. Wow, interesting. So it's a great lesson for us to teach about how George Washington never lied. Do we know that that historically happened? How's that for a question?
We do it to teach our values. Like we use Washington and we use Jesus Christ and other heroes, and we teach values.
There you go. So we teach our values through these people. Then the question becomes, is there a difference between Jesus and George Washington? There's got to be, because if not, it's a very low Christology that we have. Other questions? What influence did other first century religions and philosophies have on Christianity? You know, Judaism was around. What influence did Judaism have on Christianity? Gnosticism, ancient philosophy, did these have any influence on Christianity? Another question, how are we to understand miracles? Jesus multiplied bread to feed 5,000 men, not counting women and children. It's a lot of bread. How did he make it all? He snapped his fingers like this, clicked his heels. What did he do? Right? And just started popping up like popcorn all around? How did Jesus multiply the bread? How do we understand miracles? Did they really happen? And or is there another way to interpret that? So that, for instance, some people would interpret, some scholars would interpret the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves in this way. You know, it would be rude. I have a sandwich in my pocket, but it would be rude for me to take out that sandwich and eat it in front of you. Unless I knew that y'all had food as well, so could I just suggest that I have a little bit of food, and what else do we have around the table? Oh, Deacon Cleophas has a sandwich too, right? Oh, Terry, you have something as well? And suddenly all of us start bringing out all that we have to be able to share, and what we have is multiplied. Oh, who knows? Was any of us here when that event happened? So we don't know if it was the miraculous popping up of bread like popcorn, or whether it's explained in other ways. Another question, how are we to understand the resurrection? Did it really happen? Do you know Pope Benedict XVI? One of his early works was on the resurrection of Christ. Him as a young man questioning whether the resurrection really happened. As a young theologian. Fascinating. The conservative voice that he became actually had a radical work as a young man. Did it really happen? If not, how do we explain the rise to Easter faith? If Jesus did not rise from the dead, then how do you explain all these people willing to give their lives for him? Is Jesus different from us in kind or degree? We came to that question before with Strauss, right? Is Jesus just different in degree? Saint Jesus, a holy man? Or was Jesus different in kind? Jesus somehow God, Lord, Messiah? Another question, what is the role of apocalyptic and eschatological thinking for Jesus' preaching and his self-understanding and his claim and his ministry? Living in this, if we lived in an environment where we thought that the world was going to end in 1 or 2 years, can you imagine how our preaching would be different? Think about that for a moment. If we believed, because I saw a billboard driving to Dallas some weeks ago, right, about some solar eclipse in Jerusalem in the year 2025 or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what, 2025 is just too far away for me to be thinking about a solar eclipse in Jerusalem right now. But obviously, they had that message on that billboard for a reason. They believe that there's some significant event connected with a solar eclipse in Jerusalem in 2025 or 2027 or whenever it's going to happen. What would happen if suddenly we believed that the world was going to end in 2027? Would you do anything differently? What does this apocalyptic thought, what influence did that have on Jesus' mind and on his preaching and on the way he understood himself? How should we understand Jesus in light of first century Judaism? Jesus was a Jew. His own Jewish people crucified him, screamed for him to be crucified. How are we supposed to understand Jesus in light of that context? 2 more questions. What is the meaning of Jesus in a non-apocalyptic world today? The question ultimately is for you. Do you believe the world is going to end in the next year or 2 or 3? If not, then you're not an apocalyptic person. If you believe the world's going to end, you're an apocalyptic person. And you may be out preaching on the streets of downtown Austin tomorrow how the world's going to end. If you're not an apocalyptic person, then what does Jesus' apocalyptic message mean for you? Do you still pray, thy kingdom come? And if so, what does that mean for you?
Apocalyptic is only tonight. That's the word.
And so, okay, so we talk about God's kingdom coming to earth, God's kingdom of love and peace and justice, and Jesus was hoping that kingdom was coming now. Or is it an understanding that, all of us are going to be face to face with God one day? Maybe that's another way of wrapping it. Final questions. How did Jesus understand himself? What claims did he make? What knowledge or ignorance did he have? What was Jesus like? All these are questions that are simply raised as part of the quest for the historical Jesus, trying to figure out who this Jesus really was, because ultimately we believe that our faith has to be founded on this person. This faith is just not something that was made up. No, it was actually founded on this person. What can we know about this person, and how did that influence our faith? What we've done to the present, then, is we've looked at it through the light of Enlightenment skepticism. Now, after we take a break, it's time for us to come back and see how it is that instead, let's start here with the Christ of faith and see if that's any different for us.